Hello and welcome everyone to the Solo Multimedia Podcast, where I give you my unfiltered takes straight off the cuff. And today I'm going to be talking about the new movie from Alex Garland, Men. Couple things before I start. Yeah, I know this movie came out a fair while ago. I'm in the UK, so we got it a little bit later than the US. But either way, it was also a while ago. I saw I had other plans for this, but they've kind of fallen through, so I'm just going to talk about them now. Men is a horror film from director Alex Garland. It's been distributed by A24, and it kind of falls into the camp of those A24 films where it's like generally kind of like slightly experimental or strange or avant-garde horror films. And for those who know Alex Garland's back catalogue, you'll probably be familiar with some of the ideas he puts forward and also how weird some of his films can get. So, like, Annihilation had some pretty trippy visuals by the end. There were lots of themes about identity and that kind of thing. So there was a lot going on there. I wasn't huge on it, but, you know, it was at least an interesting film that stuck out, especially at the time. I haven't seen Ex Machina, but I've heard it's really good. And this film is definitely the one that's garnered the most, mixed reception, which is something I actually found kind of interesting because I think, for me, I think this is probably my favourite film of his, mostly because it's so cohesive and well made and presents like a singular kind of idea. And I don't mean idea in terms of themes or anything like that, but just it's such a cohesive artistic project that I think I can really appreciate that from it. I felt like Annihilation was a bit all over the place in a couple of respects, especially in terms of like the quality and what it was trying to get across at times. And that led to a really strange experience, even though it's, again, a very unique one. And I just feel like it's nice to see something that's a bit more stripped back, a bit less ambitious than something like Annihilation, but still very abstract and interesting in its own right. And that's essentially what this film is. So, for those who don't know, this is basically about a film about a woman who goes for like an English country getaway. Because she's just been in a crazy situation in terms of like in a domestic situation basically. So you kind of get this explained in snippets throughout the film. So when she first gets there, you don't have the full context of what's going on. And over the film, it slowly unfolds. You understand exactly what happened and the situation and her view of the situation and all that kind of stuff. So basically, the rest of the film, the horror portion, I guess you could say, is as she's kind of in this weird English countryside, she interacts with a bunch of different men that all act in very almost like stereotypically kind of almost like tropically misogynistic ways, I guess. And they all have, it's all the same actor who plays all the men, so there's like a kind of surreal element going on as well. This combined with the way they decided to color grade the film gives it a very kind of like almost dreamlike quality. Nothing quite feels real. I think it's meant to, you know, the whole film is definitely not meant to be taken literally, and that becomes very clear by the end. But all of this stuff just kind of reinforces this sense of this almost dreamlike, nightmarish quality, which I think is a really, really strong element of the film. But essentially what you find out is that her boyfriend, or I can't remember if it was boyfriend or husband, she wants a divorce, and then he ends up responding to that incredibly negatively. And I mean, they both, you know, tensions rise. She kind of explains why he does something that's like really fucking toxic and, you know, threatens suicide over it essentially. Then it escalates slowly where like he ends up punching her in a moment of kind of like real kind of like I wouldn't say rage, I guess, more just like frustration. I can't remember exactly what she's saying to him, but she's yelling at him and saying certain things to him, and then he ends up punching her. And then obviously she runs off, and then he kills himself essentially, or that's kind of, whether he kills himself or not is kind of up in the air, which is one of the interesting points of this film. He supposedly went up, he kicks her out, she kicks him out of the flat they're in. He goes upstairs, and then what the neighbours say is they say that he knocked on their door, went to their balcony, and tried to climb down to her balcony, and then slipped. But it's it's hard to say whether he actually did slip or whether he legitimately killed himself. But basically, that's kind of the context of why she's doing the trip. She gets there, and then there's, you know, some strange occurrences happening, like she sees a naked man who ends up following her to the rental house she's at. She calls the police, not much is done over it, that kind of stuff. But what I was going to say, one of the elements of this film I actually really, really enjoyed is the kind of, like I said, all of the technical aspects are really done. It's a really good looking film. Sorry, really well done, not really done. I'm not entirely sure what I said that, but yeah, all the technical aspects are really well done. The cinematography is really good. The performances are fucking stellar. Especially the two leads. So the guy who plays all the men in the village, it just has a huge range to his performances. And the woman who plays the lead female role is also like absolutely fantastic. Has tons of moments where she can really shine in the script. So that was all really, really cool and good to see. But I think the thing I enjoyed the most about this film is just how unique it was in what it's presenting. So one of the big criticisms of this film is, I think the takeaway a lot of people have had is that the film is essentially just saying men bad. And I think that to some extent that's like a bit in there, kind of. I could definitely understand how people come away with that interpretation, but I don't know if I really like that as an interpretation, because I think the film's less about like a broad kind of societal prescription, although this is something you can kind of apply it to society. It's like, you know, you can kind of see that certain issues in relationships are gendered one way or the other. Men tend to do this, women tend to do this. That those kinds of things are gendered. But I think this film is more about how she perceives her relationship and how, from her perspective, like how she views men, essentially, or how men interact with her in her life. And I think all of the men she sees being played by the same actor clue us into that. It's not meant to be like, this is exactly what happened in all these interactions. It's how she perceives them. It's all from her perspective. And I think in that sense, all of the horror layers of this film work as a really, really clever character study. They kind of show you more insight into her character via how she perceives other people, right? So that element's really interesting. And there's also other little subtle details in her character that I really like. For example, when she first gets to the rental place, there's like a piano. And she's talking to the guy who owns it, and he asks if she plays. She says, no, I don't play piano. But then later in the film, she is playing piano, and she's playing, maybe not like anything super complicated or anything, but she is playing a song on the piano. So that's like a minor lie that might give you insight into like, wait, why would she lie here? What are her motivations? All that kind of thing. Is she, yeah. All that kind of stuff is like super interesting in my opinion. But I think the thing that people are going to talk about most for this film is the last 30 minutes, because it's a very, very unique, section that you're not really going to see in many, if any, other horror films, honestly. So what ends up happening is, after this guy stalks her to the rental place, this weird naked guy, basically she tells the police. They don't really do much about it. They like arrest him, take him to the prison, but then they don't. They keep him in a detention center overnight, basically. But they don't actually like keep him beyond that point, so they release him the next day. She's out in the like village pub, and then there's all these men she's talking to. She finds out that then basically goes back to the house, and then all of the different men she has seen essentially come to the house in some way or another, and they're kind of presented as this very like unkillable or kind of almost like natural force, I guess. It's kind of interesting because she injures them. She gets a knife to defend herself, and one of the most insane scenes you'll see in this film is there's a moment where like one of the guys that's at the house is like putting his hand through the letterbox and trying to like open the knob so he can come in. And there's a very surreal moment where she goes up to the hand and like holds it basically. And then it grabs her and tries to pull her, and suddenly she's trying to get away, and then she stabs the knife like through his arm. And it just kind of sits in the arm, like directly through it, in between the two bones you can imagine in an arm, right? But then the guy just pulls his arm straight out the letterbox, slicing his entire arm in two. And that this doesn't seem to faze the person or anything like that. Again, it's presented in a very surreal way, in a very kind of like force of nature way, I guess you could say. And yeah, so for the rest of the film, the guy who's chasing her, because all the men, even though they may appear different, they're all the same entity, I guess you could say. From that point, this dude just has like this completely split in two arm from like elbow all the way down to the hand, which is just a really cool detail. And then other injuries happen to this guy. And then in the very like final moments of the film, what ends up happening is one of the men, I can't remember exactly how this happens, but I think it's the priest, essentially becomes like pregnant. He has like a huge belly, and you get this cycle of like 5 men birthed from the previous one. So the priest might birth like the policeman, and then the policeman might birth like the guy who's renting her the place, and then it just keeps going, and to the point where by the end even she goes kind of like, oh, for fuck's sake, like she gets bored of the cycle. Like it's a really odd moment to have in a horror film, but I think it works really well. And then the final man that gets birthed and comes in is actually her it's her husband, or like partner, I guess you could say. And he comes in, sits down, and says, we need to talk. And you notice at that point that all of the injuries that he sustained while she was fighting him, because all the men that are birthed continue the injuries of, like, from the fight that happens, essentially. All of the injuries are the same injuries that that were caused by him either jumping off or falling off the balcony, because he lands on, like, a kind of like a guard railing where there's like some spiked fencing and stuff like that. So he gets like a giant skewer through the arm, ends up splitting it. His head gets cracked open, which I think happens in a car crash. And his ankle like gets broken, which I can't remember exactly how that one happened. But yeah, it's an interesting kind of like, it's an interesting parallel, and it's kind of like, I think the idea is supposed to be that, you know, that this is what she envisions. This is kind of like the weight she's placing on herself in some way, that like she feels as though she did this to her boyfriend, and it's obviously like very direct in that sense, like where she is actually just injuring this entity that's chasing her down, and she commits the exact same injuries as the ones that he sustained after killing himself. It's a really interesting parallel, lots to think about from a character perspective, from a broader like theme perspective as well. There's just a ton to chew on. It's a really interesting way to end the film. I really did enjoy it. So yeah, that's pretty much the entire film. I would say like it's definitely worth watching, even if I've just spoiled the entire film for you and you didn't, you know, you haven't seen it yet. I would still say watch this film, because the way it's presented is very it's very unique, I think, like in just how atmospheric it is. Nothing is like done particularly quick pace, but it never feels slow either. Like a lot of these shots with just music and the British countryside work really well just as like artistic shots, and there's loads of visual imagery to chew on. Like one of the naked guy that chases her is essentially like the Green Man from certain myths, or maybe even certain religions. I'm not 100% sure where the Green Man character comes from, but you know, he's essentially the Green Man character. And you'll see that as you watch the film, basically. And there's other little things like this, other little motifs that you'll pick up on. Like at the very start, she eats an apple, and then the man jokes about it being forbidden fruit, essentially. And obviously, like he's, you know, I'm joking kind of thing. But that's still like a reference to an actual, like the Garden of Eden and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a lot going on in this film. I think it's really interesting. I thought it had a really strong pace the whole way through. All the characters were great. It's very I want to see like almost low key. It doesn't, you know, it's not like a very grand story, I guess. It's just very much about this character and her struggle, I guess. So yeah, it's very low key, but I think it does what it does really well. And one thing that is really cool about this film too is because of the way they chose to color grade everything, the British countryside actually has a really cool character to it. Like the fact that you have these incredibly vivid greens and really lush like vegetation and these huge open fields, like that's not something you get in many films. So I think that's really cool, being a Brit bonger myself. The one thing I will say that's not related to the film, but like, holy shit, we need to start like slapping every person that goes into a horror film just to chat to their mates and prove how not scared they are. This is the first time I've gone to the cinema on my own to watch a film, and it was in Stratford in London, which is like a big shopping, like a really big shopping mall or shopping centre. And essentially, there were like an entire row of people, like two groups of about 3 people in each one. It was quite a small screening. Directly behind me, that were just chatting to their mates, and like, yeah, basically they had like real, you know, I'm here because I want to prove how not scared of the horror film I am energy. It was just unbelievably obnoxious. Like, Jesus fucking Christ, can we please like just slap these people every single time we see them? It's ridiculous. Like, I can't believe it was a thing. But it's the second time this happened to me. When I went to see Hereditary in a small screening as well, it was like, nearly everyone in that screening was speaking. Fortunately, it was like, you know, a very small screening with only about like 9 people in it, so there really weren't that many people to be talking, but it was still obnoxious as fuck. Fortunately, in this one, there was more people, so, you know, more people said something to them, essentially, and I did as well. It was just like a giant pain in the ass, but yeah, whatever, annoying shit. I'll watch this at home as well at some point where it can't be ruined by annoying people, but whatever. Anyway, yeah, go watch the film. It was really fucking cool. Definitely one of the more unique films I've seen so far this year. It's a bit more divisive. So it's not going to be for everyone. I think a large part of that isn't so much just because I think people think it's a bit shallow. I think it's also because of how weird it is. Like I said, the ending does get very strange. So I can understand people not like gelling with that as much as I did. But yeah. Anyway, that's pretty much everything I have to say. Cheers for listening, and hopefully I'll see you all around. Right, peace out, everybody. Stay safe.